I've been a nurse for almost 10 years, and late shifts are part of my routine. I take pride in my job, helping patients every night at the hospital. A few weeks ago, things started to change. I began to feel uneasy. On my 4th shift that week, I walked into an empty room. The curtains were swirling, almost like they were responding to something. I felt a chill creep down my spine. I mentioned it to a colleague, and she agreed that room felt off. I tried to shake it off as tiredness. Then, the worst happened. One night, a patient began to recover. I felt relieved. It seemed like a small miracle. Just when I thought we were turning a corner, the alarms rang loud and harsh. The patient coded right in front of me. I was frozen. I tried to convince myself it was just a fluke. Stuff like this happens, I thought. But the very next night, it happened again. Another patient, another brightening hope that vanished in an instant. I was at the nurse's station when I caught a flicker of shadow out of the corner of my eye. My heart raced, and beads of sweat collected on my forehead. I told myself it was just fatigue. But deep down, my gut told me something was terribly wrong. Then it happened again. A third patient coded. Each time, the shadow flickered just before the alarm. I felt panic tightening in my chest. I kept asking myself if I was losing my grip on reality. Each death felt heavier on my shoulders like a dark cloud that wouldn't leave. My shifts became a dread-filled cycle. My colleagues noticed my change in demeanor. They joked I looked haunted and needed a vacation. But I couldn't afford to take time off. My student loans felt like chains. I kept thinking about those shadows. What were they trying to tell me? Was I next? One night, the tension in the hospital was thick. I felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking my every move. I walked the familiar hallways, glancing nervously over my shoulder, sensing something lurking in the dark. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. It sent a wave of fear through me. "Clara," the voice called. I froze, heart pounding. Who was that? I turned to look, but there was nobody behind me. Then out of nowhere I saw it, a shadow creeping along the wall. It kept growing, moving closer. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with questions. What was happening to me? Then just like that, the shadow vanished. I was left standing alone. I didn't know if fatigue was playing tricks on me or if something else was happening. I felt disoriented, like I was losing connection with reality. If that was becoming my new normal, why was it still haunting me? It felt like the hospital itself had become filled with whispers and secrets. No answers came, just more questions. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for me. What did it all mean? I couldn't sleep after that shift. The shadows slipped into my dreams, twisting and turning, whispering my name. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing. I knew I had to go back to work, but just the thought made my stomach churn. When I arrived, the air felt thick and oppressive. I tried to focus on my duties, but my mind kept drifting back to the whispers. Could they be warnings? I found myself stepping cautiously around each corner, my senses heightened. I no longer felt like I was alone in those halls. I felt watched. The night nurse Tina greeted me with a smile that barely touched her eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said jokingly. I forced a laugh, but inside, I was terrified. I needed to talk to someone, to share my fears. But how could I explain a shadow when I couldn't even explain it to myself? As my shift began, I paced through the ward, ensuring each patient was stable, my hand hovering over the call light. I couldn't shake the feeling something was going to happen. Each time I heard a distant beep or a faint murmur, my heart would skip. Then I heard it again, a whisper clear as day. "Clara." The voice floated through the air, and I turned quickly, scanning the empty hallway. No one was there. The sound echoed in my ears, sending chills down my spine. I felt my pulse quicken as I tried to make sense of it. Who was calling my name? In a moment of courage, or maybe foolishness, I decided to follow the sound. Each step felt heavy, as if the floor was trying to pull me down. I walked deeper into the hospital, toward a section I rarely visited. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. Then I saw it. A figure at the end of the hall, dark and indistinct. The moment our eyes met, it felt like ice shot through me. It stood there, motionless, watching. I took a step back, and the figure dissipated into the darkness, leaving a suffocating silence filling the air. I rushed back to the nurse's station, my heart pounding. My hands trembled as I tried to process what I had just seen. I needed answers. I grabbed a nurse's log and flipped through pages, hoping for something, anything that could explain the strange happenings. That's when I found it. 3 entries about patients who had coded, all just before their deaths. Each entry included the same note, a shadow seen during their final moments. My stomach dropped. I wasn't alone in this. Suddenly the alarm blared, cutting through the silence. My pulse quickened as I raced toward the room, another patient in distress. And just before I entered, I caught a flash of it again, the shadow flickering at the corner of my eye. The urgency surged through me as I pushed the door open. I couldn't let it happen again, not this time. But as I stepped inside, I felt the air shift. Whispers filled the room, echoing my fear. "Clara," they called again, and then everything went dark. The darkness swallowed me, heavy and suffocating. My heart felt like it might explode from my chest as I struggled to catch my breath. Panic clawed at my throat. I blinked, trying to focus, but there was nothing, just an endless, oppressive silence. Then, like a flicker of light through a crack, the whispers returned. "Clara." They filled my mind with dread. I felt them wrap around me, thick as smoke, pulling me deeper into the void. I stumbled backward, hoping to find the door, but my hands met empty air. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. I was trapped. Just when I thought I might hyperventilate, the lights flickered back to life, blinking on like someone flipping a switch. I was still in the patient's room, but everything felt wrong. The bed was empty. The monitors were silent. Their lights dimmed. My heart raced anew. Where was the patient? I turned frantically, searching. That's when I noticed a shift. A figure slumped against the wall in a corner, obscured by shadows. My skin prickled as I took a cautious step forward. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. There was no response, just the echo of my voice returning to me. I took another step, and the shadow moved, melding further into the darkness. I hesitated. My instinct screamed to run, to escape this madness, but I had to know. As I neared, I could make out the outline of a body. A patient, eyes closed, pale and still. I rushed closer to check for any signs of life, but the moment I reached out to touch the shoulder, a jolt of cold shot through my fingertips. My breath hitched. "Please no," I muttered. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it flickered, then went out. In the dim light of the room, everything felt unreal, distorted. I couldn't tell what was shadow and what was shape. Then I remembered the entries in the log, the patients who coded before death. Could this be another? I was terrified, yet something drew me closer. If I was losing another patient to the shadow, I needed to act. With a shaky breath, I gripped the patient's wrist, feeling for a pulse. Just as I registered a faint heartbeat, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. I jumped, heart racing again, my hands instinctively retracting from the patient. A series of urgent footsteps pounded down the corridor, bringing with them the metallic scent of fear. And then I heard her voice, the night nurse, Tina. "Clara, are you in there?" Relief washed over me, but the urgency of the situation remained. I stepped back and yelled, "Get security! Something's wrong!" Just then, I saw it out of the corner of my eye again. The shadow, darker than before, sliding back toward the door. My heart dropped as realization hit. It wasn't finished with me yet. Tina burst in, her eyes wide as she assessed the situation. What happened? What's going on? But before I could answer, the lights flickered one last time, plunging us both into darkness once more. This time, I could feel it drawing closer. And I knew, whatever it was coming for us now. I felt the darkness wrap around us, thick and suffocating. I tried to call out to Tina, but my voice faltered, lost in the heavy silence. Panic bubbled in my stomach. Had the shadow caught us? Then, with a sudden burst, the lights flashed back on. My breath came in quick gasps as I scanned the room. The figure against the wall was gone. I blinked, expecting it to be lingering in the shadows, but nothing was there. Just the empty room feeling more sterile than ever. Tina stood beside me, her face a mask of confusion. "What just happened?" she asked, scanning for signs of what had occurred. I shook my head. "I don't know. The patient was..." My voice trailed off. I stepped back, trying to gather my thoughts. I swear I felt a pulse, but now... Before I could finish, the lights flickered again, plunging us into dimness. I clutched the edge of a nearby cot as fear surged. Just then, I felt it, a cold breeze brushing against the back of my neck. "Clara!" Tina's voice cut through my panic, full of urgency. She pointed toward the door. "Look!" I turned, heart hammering, and saw it. The shadow coalescing again, more defined this time, darting around the doorway as if taunting us. It was moving in a strange, jerky manner, like a marionette with tangled strings. I couldn't make sense of it. "Tina!" I shouted, my voice rising in panic. "Get back!" I wanted to run, but my body felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. Just then, there was another crash from the hallway, louder this time, like furniture being overturned. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed Tina's arm. "We need to leave, now." We stumbled out of the room together, only to find the hallway in disarray, papers scattered, lights flickering overhead. The air was thick with a smell I couldn't identify, something metallic and rotten. I knew we weren't alone. "Clara, over there!" Tina pointed down the hallway, and I followed her gaze. A figure was standing at the far end, silhouetted in the stark emergency lighting. It was too still, too quiet. "Is that... Ben?" I whispered, recognizing the familiar shape of my colleague, the day nurse who had been on shift before me. But something felt off. The way he stood, rigid and unmoving, gave me chills. "Ben." He didn't respond. Instead, he swayed slightly, like a tree caught in an unseen wind. I stepped forward cautiously. "Ben, are you all right?" Just as I reached him, a high-pitched wail pierced the air. My heart dropped. It was coming from behind us. Tina grabbed my shoulder, terror in her eyes. "We have to run." I didn't need convincing. Suddenly, the question of what that shadow was seemed secondary to our survival. I looked back once, just as the figure jerkily twisted and lunged toward us from the shadows, closing the distance with an unnatural speed. "Run!" I shouted, adrenaline surging as I pulled Tina with me. We sprinted down the corridor, desperate to escape. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was haunting us was only getting started. I didn't stop running until we reached the stairwell, breathless and frantic. The fluorescent lights flickered above us, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I could hear Tina's rapid breaths next to mine, her panic mirroring my own. "Where do we go?" Tina gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "Down," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "We'll find another exit." We rushed down the stairs, 2 flights, until we hit the ground level. The buzzing of the overhead lights echoed our frantic steps. I pressed my palm against the cold metal of the door. "Is it safe to go out?" Tina asked, glancing back nervously. The heaviness of the air made it hard to think straight. I nodded, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. As I pushed the door open, a chill swept through the emergency exit like a warning. The parking lot was empty, illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. but something felt wrong. "Stay close," I whispered, scanning for signs of movement. We took a few cautious steps into the lot when I noticed something unsettling. A group of figures was gathered near one of the cars, their backs to us. The sight sent shivers down my spine. They were too still, almost as if they were waiting for something, or someone. "Tina, do you see that?" I pointed, my heart thumping in my chest. "I see it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly one of the figures turned, my breath caught in my throat. The face was barely illuminated, but it was enough to recognize Ben's expression. They all wore the same agonized look, vacant and hollow. I stepped back, fear electrifying my veins. What happened to them? My voice barely broke the silence, panic clawing at my insides. Just then, a loud crash echoed from inside the hospital. It was a deafening sound that rattled my bones, followed by the unmistakable wail again. This time, it was louder, more desperate. The figures around the car twitched as if stirred from a trance. "Clara, let's get back inside," Tina said, her voice on the verge of breaking. Before I could reply, one of the figures took a step forward, revealing a hospital gown stained with dark patches. It was as though I was pulled under by an unseen force, dragging me back toward the entrance. I turned to run, but my legs refused to move. "Tina, we can't." Then everything shifted. The shadows around the figures grew longer, stretching across the pavement like fingers reaching for us. "Help us!" A whisper floated through the air, chilling me to the bone. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. That's when I saw something glinting in the light, a scalpel gleaming in Ben's hand. "Tina!" I shouted, finally finding my voice. "We need to go, now." I grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the door, heart racing. The shadows lurked behind us, closing in faster with each desperate step. Just as we reached the entrance, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Standing there, panting, we stared at each other, realizing the true weight of our situation. We were trapped, and something sinister was awakening inside the walls of the hospital. And somewhere in the darkness, I knew it was only just beginning. The hallway felt alive, as if the walls themselves were breathing. I turned to Tina, who was still catching her breath. Her disbelief mirrored my dread. "What do we do now?" she finally whispered, the tremor in her voice betraying her fear. "We need to find a safe place," I said, glancing down the dark corridor. It loomed ominously, shadows pooling where the light couldn't reach. "Let's try the supply room." I led the way, heart pounding louder than my footsteps. The supply room was only a few doors down, but each step felt like an eternity. I could feel the weight of those lifeless eyes lingering in my mind, their hollow stares still etched into my memory. When we reached the door, I hesitated. What if the figures were still out there, waiting for us? I turned the handle slowly, pushing the door open. A musty odor hit us, mingled with the scent of disinfectant. Darkness enveloped the room, the faint beam from my phone revealing row after row of empty shelves. "Do you think they could follow us in here?" Tina asked, her voice strained. I shook my head, trying to convince myself as much as her. "They wouldn't come in, right? They wanted us out there," I replied, stepping inside. The door creaked shut behind us. I leaned against it, closing my eyes for a moment. We needed to think. We couldn't just wait for whatever was outside to come for us. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was past midnight, but the screen flickered and then went black. "Great. The battery's dead," I said, panic creeping in. "Do you think they're really dead?" "Who?" Tina asked, the shadows dancing across her face. The thought of Ben sprang to my mind, his vacant stare haunting me. The people outside. They didn't look right. Maybe whatever happened here changed them. Tina paled. Changed them how? "Like they weren't themselves anymore," I whispered, gripping the side of the door. Something rattled just outside, and the heavy silence deepened. Suddenly, I noticed something glimmering in the corner of the room, a small glass vial. I walked over, picked it up, and turned it in my hand. The label was faded but still readable. Adrenaline. Clara? Tina's voice wavered. I turned to see her eyes wide, staring at a different part of the room. What is it? Then I heard it too. A low growl echoed from the hallway outside, deep and resonant. It sent chills rippling over my skin. Hurry, lock the door, I urged, pushing the vial into my pocket as I raced back to the entrance. I pulled the door shut, my heart racing again, but just as I turned the lock, the growl faded, replaced by the sound of hurried footsteps, many hurried footsteps getting closer. Tina grabbed my arm. What if they come in here? I swallowed hard, adrenaline surging through me. Then we'll have to fight. I took a deep breath, realizing there was no way to hide from what lurked in the dark. But as I glanced at the door, I caught sight of a shadow lurking outside, waiting. And in that moment, I knew. We weren't safe. Not yet. Not at all. As the footsteps approached, I could feel a tight knot of fear tightening in my chest. I stood still, straining to hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. Each footfall was heavy, deliberate. They were getting closer. Clara, what are we going to do? Tina's voice was barely above a whisper now, each syllable laced with panic. I glanced around the supply room, searching for anything we could use as a weapon or a shield. The shelves were lined with boxes that probably held bandages, syringes, and other medical supplies. We should grab something, I said, moving down the closest aisle, hoping to find a way to defend ourselves. My fingers brushed against a box labeled gauze, and next to it a canister of antiseptic. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Suddenly the footsteps stopped, and an eerie silence settled over us. It was as if the air itself held its breath. I leaned in closer to Tina. Maybe they passed by, I said, but I didn't believe it. The chill that ran down my spine told me they were right outside. Then, without warning, a loud crash echoed from the door. My heart dropped. Someone, or something, was trying to force its way in. "We need to barricade the door," I yelled, my voice shaking. I rushed to a nearby shelving unit and shoved it against the door. Tina joined me, her face pale with fear. The door rattled violently as the entity on the other side pushed against it, a sound like a low growl rising again, mingled with guttural snarls that made my stomach turn. My mind raced. They were here. They were coming. "I can't do this, Clara," Tina cried out, tears streaming down her face. "I can't. We have to hold on. We can't let them in," I urged, my voice harder than I felt. I needed to be strong. But all I could think about were those lifeless eyes and what they meant for us. We're not done yet. The growling intensified, and I knew we couldn't stay in the supply room much longer. "We should find another way out. There has to be a back exit," I said, looking around desperately. "Where?" Tina asked, glancing at the walls as if they could somehow offer us a solution. I recalled the map of the hospital I'd seen earlier. "There's a stairwell down the hall. Maybe we can get to the roof. It might give us a signal for help." I felt a rush of determination. The adrenaline from the vial nestled in my pocket surged through me, urging me to act. Tina hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between me and the door. "Okay, let's do it." I took a deep breath and positioned myself at the door's edge, ready to open it. On 3. 1, 2. Before I could say 3, a loud slam shook the door again, and the shelves began to slide away. "Now!" I shouted, flinging the door open. A figure lunged at us, and in that terrifying instant, I realized I had to confront them head-on. That's when I saw it. A face twisted in anger, eyes filled with madness. A glimpse that would haunt me forever. "Run!" I yelled, yanking Tina back as we flung ourselves into the hall, knowing whatever waited for us wasn't finished yet. We stumbled out into the hallway, breathless and disoriented. The sterile scent of the hospital hit us hard, mixing with the sweat and fear clinging to our skin. I turned briefly, catching a glimpse of the figure in the supply room, an apparition of dread in tattered scrubs, with wild eyes wide with hunger. It didn't follow us, but I knew that wouldn't last. "Where now?" Tina gasped, her eyes wide, scanning the shadows that lurked in the dimly lit corridor. "Down the hall," I said, pointing toward the left. "The stairwell should be just past the break room." We moved quickly, the rhythmic beeping of machines in the distance almost comforting against the terror clinging to us. Each footstep echoed like a warning. I kept my guard up, half expecting the creature to pounce at any moment. As we rounded a corner, the break room came into view. The dull light flickered ominously above the door, casting strange shadows that danced across the floor. When we reached it, I hesitated, peering inside. The room was dark, but it didn't hide the broken furniture or the overturned chairs. A coffee pot lay shattered on the floor, pooling cold, dark liquid among the debris. "Clara, we can't stop," Tina urged, tugging at my arm. I nodded, but I couldn't help myself. One last look wouldn't hurt. That's when I noticed it, a faint scuffle coming from the far corner. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart racing again. Before I could respond, a massive hand shot out from under a fallen table, grabbing the edge and pulling forward. The figure that emerged was more grotesque than the first. It had patches of hair missing, skin cold and grey, eyes glimmering with malice. "Go!" I shouted, the word tearing from my throat as I shoved Tina backward. We sprinted back down the hall, adrenaline spiking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked over my shoulder just in time to see the creature scrambling toward us, its movements jerky and unnatural. "We need to—" I started, but my sentence was cut off as we crashed into a wall. The sign marking the stairwell was just ahead. We reached the door, and I flung it open with all my strength. I pushed Tina ahead of me and followed her inside, slamming the door shut behind us. The heavy thump resonated against the metal door as the creature crashed against it. "We need to go up. Fast!" I yelled, my pulse pounding in my ears. We rushed up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, the air turning stale as we climbed. "What's happening, Clara? What do they want?" "I don't know, just keep going." Finally, we reached the rooftop door. I hesitated, listening for any sign that we were still being followed. The thuds had stopped, but I could feel a growing sense of dread. Then the door swung open, and I was face to face with another figure. This one stood still, eyes dark as the void, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it had the same hollow gaze as the others. "Clara," Tina whispered, panic welling in her voice. "Back! Back!" I shouted, pushing us both away from the door, but it was already too late. That's when everything went black. I woke up on the cold, hard floor. My body throbbed all over and my vision swam as I tried to sit up. The rooftop door, once closed, now lay ajar, swinging slightly from the wind. I could hear distant sirens, but they felt worlds away. "Clara!" Tina's voice pierced through my hazy thoughts. I turned my head, searching for her amid the shadows. She was slumped against the wall, cheeks streaked with dirt and fear. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I croaked, forcing myself to my feet. I felt a sharp pain in my ankle, but pushed it aside. Did we get away?" "I think so," she said, rubbing her arms as if to ward off an unseen chill. "At least for now." I took a tentative step toward the door, glancing back at the darkened skyline beyond the rooftop. The stillness made me uneasy, too quiet after the panic we had just escaped. "Where do we go from here?" Tina asked, her voice shaking slightly. "We need to find a way down," I replied, desperate for a plan. I motioned toward the stairs. "The way we came. If the creatures are gone, we can find help." Tina nodded, but her eyes were wide with dread. What if they're waiting for us down there? I didn't have an answer. I opened the door, wincing at the creak it made. The stairwell loomed ahead, dimly lit and inviting, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just experienced. As we stepped cautiously inside, I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I froze. Did you see that? What? Tina whispered, her voice caught in her throat. Just as I took another step, Tina gasped. Clara, behind you! I whirled around as the door slammed shut, the darkness closing in with a suffocating intensity. I could hear muffled sounds beyond the door, scrapings and whimpers. I gripped the railing, trying to steady my racing heart. I pushed the door open, only to find it empty. The hallway was dim, the corners shadowed. It's gone, I muttered, but my relief was short-lived. The sound of footsteps echoed from below, deliberate and slow. We need to move, I urged Tina, pulling her toward the staircase. We needed to get away from whatever was lurking just out of sight. Halfway down, the lights flickered once more. I grabbed Tina's arm, panic rising in my chest. What was that? I don't know, she stammered, her eyes darting nervously. Before I could respond, an awful, guttural moan echoed through the stairwell, chilling my blood. It was a sound that clawed at something deep inside me, something primal. Clara! Tina cried, and I glanced back up the stairs. Emerging from the darkness was another creature, writhing and twisting as it climbed toward us, its mouth stretched wide in an expression of unending hunger. I grabbed Tina and we started to run faster, my thoughts racing. We needed a way out, any exit. But this time we weren't just escaping, we were being hunted. Clara, look. Tina pointed at a door just ahead. A fire exit sign glowed faintly above it, promising a way out of this nightmare. Go, I shouted, and we surged toward the exit, anguish and dread clawing at our heels, knowing just how close death had come. We threw open the door, the sound echoing into the unknown, and stepped through, only to find ourselves at the very edge of the rooftop. The vast emptiness stared back at us, with no safe ground to land on below. Clara, what do we do now? Tina's voice trembled. That's when I saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows across the rooftop, its hollow gaze locking onto mine. And in that moment I realized this was just the beginning. I could hardly process what was happening. We were trapped at the edge of the roof, the figures I once knew as colleagues now looming in front of us, their vacant eyes piercing through the darkness. The realization hit me like a freight train. They had once been alive, and now they were twisted remnants of themselves. Clara, we need to jump, Tina shouted, her voice tinged with desperation. Fear I couldn't describe surged inside me, battling against the urge to run. Jump where? I cried, glancing at the void below. The asphalt seemed miles away, the wind whipping around us like a taunt. I could feel the creatures creeping closer, their movements erratic and monstrous. Anywhere, just away from them, Tina urged, her eyes wild with panic. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. My heart raced and fear gnawed at my insides. The figures were closing in too fast. Tina looked back at them, and in an instant I could see her resolve fading. Okay, I yelled as I gripped her hand tightly. We'll jump on 3. As I counted down, our eyes locked, and for a fleeting moment I saw my old friend within her, fighting against the terror that sought to consume us both. 1, 2, 3. We jumped, my stomach flipping as we leapt into the air, time slowing as we fell. The world around us blurred, and all I could think of was the hard ground rushing to meet us. Then, impact. The asphalt flew up to meet us, or rather, we found ourselves sprawled unceremoniously on the roof ledge, our hearts racing but alive. I immediately scrambled up, frantically checking Tina to see if she was hurt. What was that? She gasped, looking back at the figures now peering down from the edge. I don't know, I said, trying to catch my breath, but a sense of dread lingered. But we need to move. Now. We dashed toward the rooftop access door, the adrenaline coursing through our veins. The night air felt heavy, and the panic around us weighed thick. We had no idea how many creatures lurked in the building, but the surreal atmosphere promised more terrors still. We burst through the door, heart pounding in sync like an alarm bell ringing with urgency. "Which way?" Tina asked, her voice breaking slightly as we spun around, frantic. "Let's head toward the fire escape," I suggested. "It has to lead us out. We can't stay here." We took off down the narrow stairs, the metal steps creaking beneath our weight. The flickering lights buzzed ominously above us, casting jagged shadows against the walls. I held onto the railing as if it were a lifeline. I could feel something following us, the breath of danger nipping at our heels. Tina stumbled behind me, her breath quickening. "Clara, I can't keep running," she gasped. "We're almost there," I urged, pushing forward. But the fear was inescapable, pulsing through the very air we breathed. Each step echoed with the sounds of pursuit, the growls vibrating through the stairwell. Finally, we reached the fire escape at the bottom, the door slightly ajar. I kicked it open, the metal screaming as it swung out. Outside in the alleyway, the night shrouded us in darkness. "We made it," I exclaimed, gasping for air. But the fleeing relief was short-lived when I heard the unmistakable sounds of chaos erupting behind us. Tina's eyes widened in horror as she turned back toward the building. "What if they come after us?" "Then we keep running," I shouted, the urgency pulling my legs forward as we sprinted into the night. We zigzagged through the shadows of the alley, glancing back only to find nothing lurking immediately. We had gained some distance, but what if the darkness was even worse than the chaos inside? As we navigated through rain-slicked streets, a part of me couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that whatever had been awakened in that hospital didn't truly need to be close to us to reach us. The air had shifted, and with it, a desperation lingered, as if the very fabric of reality had frayed. "What do we do now?" Tina asked, panting as she leaned against a wall, trying to catch her breath. I looked toward the night sky, the stars obscured by thick clouds. I could hardly believe we had escaped the nightmare, but in the recesses of my mind I wondered how long we could run. "I don't know, but whatever happened back there, it's not over," I said, glancing around uneasily, a creeping sensation chilling my spine. "We have to tell someone. Someone needs to know." As I spoke those words, the distant wail of sirens abruptly broke through the silence, echoing into the air. I felt an uneasy hope. Help was on the way. But then, as panic receded slightly, an ominous thought struck me. What if those sirens were the last echoes of a reality we no longer understood? What if the real threat wasn't the shadows that stalked our every move, but rather the unsettling mystery of what had slipped through the cracks of our world? Somewhere in the depths of that hospital, the shadows still whispered. They were waiting, a haunting promise lingering in the night. As we stood in that alley, breathing heavily and clutching each other's hands, I realized that while we had escaped, the questions and shadows remained, elusive and terrifying. I didn't know if I would ever be able to escape the darkness that had clawed its way into my life, or if it would always be following softly in my footsteps. "Clara, let's go," Tina urged, pulling me away from the shadows. I nodded, swallowing the dread that lingered, and we stepped forward. A part of me would always wonder what happened in that hospital on that fateful night, but I also knew I had to keep moving. It was the only choice left in a world where shadows roamed, and the answers eluded our grasp.